Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 32 of Daffy's Roundtable. Living in Canada, snake bites are not something we have to worry about too often, but in some parts of the world, snake bites can be a big problem. The World Health Organization estimates around 1.8 to 2.7 million envenomations each year. These bites end up in limb amputations, permanent disabilities, and in many cases, death. And unfortunately, most of these bites happen in Africa, Asia, Central, and South America, where in many areas medical resources are sparse. Regardless where you are in the world, one of the best things you can do to prepare yourself for a bad situation is to actually learn about snake venom, what it does, why snakes bite you in the first place, and what to do when you do get bit. My guest today is Nathaniel Frank, owner of MToxins Venom Lab. Nathaniel is the perfect guest to teach us about snake bites, do's and don'ts. We're also going to learn all about venom extractions and hear his stories working with venomous animals every day. But before we do that, a huge thank you to the show sponsor Exoterra for making this episode possible. Exoterra makes quality products for our pet reptiles to make them feel at home. Okay, let's dive into this week's episode. Everybody, please help me welcome Nathaniel Frank of MToxins Venom Lab. Nathaniel, hello. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm very excited to do this. I don't know too much about snake venom, but being in the reptile hobby and being in this industry, it's always something that's very intriguing and interesting. And of course, when you're showing people all the reptiles, it's one of the first questions that comes up: Is this venomous? Is this poisonous? People wanna? It's the everyone's interested in the fear factor, I guess. Is the
Yes,
best way to put it.
yes.
But you actually work. You actually work with these venomous animals. And so, before we dive into maybe your history a little bit, I want to ask you, what's it like going to work every day and having something that that's something that's very dangerous. Let's say, we'll maybe get into how dangerous you think they are later on. But like as it stands right now, something that's very dangerous and working with them every day. How does it feel to you? And are you ever really scared?
No. You train for it and you practice. So to go in and have fear is actually a bad thing. You want to have a totally clear state of mind, and it's incredibly fun. It is so much fun to extract venom.
Awesome. Yeah. So it I've seen a few videos. It definitely seems like it is. I don't know if I'll personally try it without all the extensive training, but it definitely seems like it's a lot of fun. Awesome. Okay. So then maybe let's start with how you got into this and sort of your history in the hobby. Were you a keeper? And maybe like how did you open M Toxins and what's the story behind it?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I started out as a keeper, as a private keeper. I started keeping turtles and tortoises when I was 6,
Awesome.
and that was my real passion. That was my obsession. And I had a cousin who, at the time, was keeping various different snakes, and moved back to Wisconsin. And so, at about age 9, I started caring for those, and it got me really, really hooked on snakes as well. And as a kid, I was really, really obsessed with the field guides and seeing the venomous snakes. And in Wisconsin, we do have two species, but they're not in the part of the state that I live in. So, for some reason, as a little kid, I really gravitated towards coral snakes, and that became like a lifelong dream, was just to get to work with those. Um, so so yeah, I've been keeping 33 years now.
That's awesome. Wow. And were you keeping just like I don't want to say normal, but just like the regular species that we all commonly keep, or were you already keeping any venomous species?
No, I didn't. I actually started mentoring um, with venomous species later on, in the 2000s. All through the 90s and the 80s, I was working with stuff that's now common but wasn't at the time. Um, it's crazy to say that, but like, all the ball pythons were pretty much wild caught and didn't eat, and
Wow.
were very, very defensive animals, and it was just a different time. Um, it's pre-internet age keeping, so
Right.
um, so it was a lot of hitting the books and going to the library and studying everything you could find. I remember when the price lists for those animals were all mailed to you as snail mail,
Wow.
so it was just a different time. But yeah, I mean, ball pythons and boa constrictors were the first snakes that I really worked with, and I still to this day keep ball pythons and boa constrictors because they're just a childhood love of mine. We use them for educational outreach at the Serpentarium. Um, but yeah, my pet, quote unquote pet snake that I still have is my long term boa constrictor that I've had with me for a long time.
That's awesome. It must feel like it must be really easy to come home and handle after all day of just very careful step by step, like watching every move you make when you're handling the venomous species.
Well, it's so nice to have snakes that you can actually interact with in a I don't want to say a positive way, because we try to keep our venomous handlings in a positive manner as well. But it's nice to have to hold something that can't kill me,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
exactly. Yeah,
um,
100%.
and just get to really enjoy those animals. And my children both have ball pythons that they've raised basically from hatchlings, and it's just fun to kind of keep that going because it was such a big part of my childhood.
That's very very cool. Okay, awesome. So from there, how did the keeping of the boa constrictors and the ball pythons, how did that take you to toxins?
So I started working and getting to know some people that were keeping venomous at the time in Wisconsin, and I went out and got coral snakes and started following that dream of being able uh, to have corals. And as I was kind of learning, I learned in a very inappropriate manner. And what I mean is, I started out, typically you should take a gentle progression in learning to handle venomous reptiles, of starting with something that can be treated locally that's not very toxic, and you kind of work your way up. The
Right.
first venomous snake that I ever handled was a 9.5 foot long black mamba. Um,
Wow.
that's how I learned. It is not the right way to learn, and it's not what I teach my interns and staff.
The opposite of
Um,
baby steps.
the opposite of baby steps. Let's start with, and it wasn't ego driven. It wasn't that I needed to work with one of the most toxic snakes. That's what was available for me to start learning to work with.
Right.
Well, a coral snake is nothing like a black mamba, but in the time that I was, learning to work with these, it was mambas and taipans were pretty much the first snakes that I was handling. And then I kind of went back. I mean, I had been working with really dangerous elapids for a long time before I ever handled a copperhead or a cottonmouth. So it was really the wrong way to do it. But
Right.
I went with kind of what was available at the time. Um, but I was keeping these corals, and a friend of mine brought in. Uh, he was the only one importing them at the time. Was the Malaysian blue coral snake, and if you've never seen one, it's probably the most beautiful snake in the world. Um, and I decided to get those and start studying them. Well, it turned out that a very well known venom researcher, Dr. Brian Fry, was doing a study on that snake's venom and had ran out. And um, he was asking anyone that had them if they could provide venom samples for him. So I kind of early on started extracting without really any knowledge, but I eventually got to know a man who has a 60+ year career as a venom extractor named Jack Facene, who was a protege to Mr. Bill Haast, and he took me under his wing and taught me the right way to do things, not necessarily how to handle, because he was all the way in Florida, I'm all the way in northern Wisconsin. But what to do with venom, how to process it, how to produce a good quality product, and along with some safety as well in methods. Um, and and so that kind of got the start of it. So we provided these samples to Dr. Fry. They released the paper, and then he came back and said, "What else can you produce for me?" So I started to expand very quickly, and have provided him um, venoms from probably 20 different genera across several species.
That is very very cool. Before we continue on that story, a couple questions. So, was there any like when you first purchased those initial coral snakes? Was there any laws or did you have to get permits to be able to keep those in Minnesota?
No, no.
Is it still like that to this day, or have things changed?
Things have changed a little bit in our state. We have, our state, which is actually Wisconsin. We've got um, uh, very loose and lax wild animal regulations.
Okay.
Um, but it's the city that determines what's legal and what isn't. So, um, from the state level, it's legal to have anything you want: tigers and bears and all venomous snakes, all these types of things. And then it's just within the confines of the city, what will they allow? So,
Okay.
so no, there were no permits needed or anything like that, and
And then it's
it hasn't changed.
okay, and I assume it was the same thing for also to just once you own the snake, you can extract venom from it. There's nothing stopping you from doing it once it's your snake, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
very interesting, awesome. And then okay, so and you said that you're in Minnesota and uh, Mr. Jack Vicente, I believe his name
Yes.
was in Florida.
Yes.
How did the teaching happen? Was it also online? You said it was like not in person. Like, was he sending you videos or was it like Zoom calls or?
It was just a lot of emails and phone calls,
Okay.
and he did everything in his power to convince me not to open a venom lab. Um, and basically, just because it's one of the hardest businesses you could possibly get into, and it's very hard to find your niche uh, and to I don't want to say be successful, because I don't know how you would measure success in this business, to be honest.
Right.
It's so non-traditional, but to actually be able to sell venom and have a customer base, um, and so that was a lot of it. And then I took several trips flying down to Florida to work with him as well, and to work with others. Like, for example, there's the very well-known Miami-Dade Venom One response unit, the big anti-venom bank for the United States. That
Right.
was ran by a guy I got to be very good friends with, and is he's since retired from there. But Jeffrey Fobb, he taught me how to handle king cobras, and so I wanted to learn bad enough so I would fly to Florida to get lessons in how to do this work, how to work safely around them.
Yeah, because it seems like something that would be very tough to teach over the phone or something like that. That's super interesting. So did you learn all that as MToxins was already opening and established, or was this all before you opened the Venom Lab?
It was all as we were opening. We uh, we were providing venoms from certain types of snakes to Dr. Fry, and as the scientific papers kept coming out, more scientists were coming to us for more of the venoms. And part of the reason for that was a lot of the things that Dr. Fry needed were from rare snakes. So stuff not commonly kept. And, it wasn't like they were calling for gaboon viper venom.
Right. Yeah.
They were calling for, rare mountain pit vipers like Ovophis genus, stiletto snake venom, things of that nature, where we were the only lab producing it. So it's part of the reason that we've had some success is producing those rare venoms that have never really been studied very very closely.
Awesome. And are those same venoms ever used to create anti-venom? Or are they still too early and maybe still in the research stages?
Some of the rare venoms are uh, they're pretty much just being done for private scientific research and evolutionary. The evolution of snake venom is one of the biggest topics that a lot of our customer base work on. Um, but as we grew, that's when we started to get anti-venom contracts. And so we do a lot of gaboon vipers and rhino vipers and black mambas and all that stuff for the African contract, for example. Um, and a lot of the common species and genera for Asia, India, that whole thing. Um, so we do a lot of the common stuff for the anti-venom stuff, but the rare snakes are still kind of the private research field.
That's awesome. Okay. Do you are you you're not creating the antivenom yourself. You're extracting the venom, and are you sending it to a lab in the United States to be making an antivenom, and they're sending it as an antivenom overseas, or are you just sending the venom as is over there?
So there's no venom lab in the world that produces their own anti-venom. It's
Okay.
all done by the pharmaceutical companies.
Okay.
So what that process looks like is you have the venom extractors are purifying, collecting, purifying, and shipping out the venom, and then you have the pharmaceutical companies taking that product and using it to microdose at their own animal farms. So typically, it's horses that are used. Um, in
Wow.
some cases, it's sheep, but they're microdosed a sublethal dose of that venom, which triggers an immune response in them. They build up what are called IgG antibodies. And on a regular basis, those animals give a blood plasma donation. It's purified and turned into antivenom. So that's kind of the easiest way to explain how it's made. Um, but there's actually a heck of a lot of science behind it. Um, what they do to the actual immunoglobulin and everything like that is very very specific and proprietary to each antivenom manufacturer. But um, to answer your question, we do antivenoms all for international. So our antivenom producers are custom pharmaceutical companies in India, in Mexico, etc.
So that so the actual antivenom is basically an antibody of another animal. It's not actually anything that's created from the snake itself.
That's correct.
That is,
So
I had no idea.
those antibodies are trained, if you will, is kind of a loose way to explain it, um, to identify and attack those specific types of snake toxins. So it's really very interesting. When you're holding a vial of antivenom, you're literally holding blood plasma, is what it is in its simplest explanation.
That's, yeah, very very cool, awesome. And then, okay, so when you're sending when you're shipping the venom overseas, is there any precautions that you have to take for it to, like, I don't know if this even makes sense, this question, but like, does venom have an expiry date?
It does
It
actually.
does. Okay.
What we do is we turn the venom into a powder, and we do that using a machine called a lyophilizer, which is a fancy laboratory food dehydrator, is a good way to think of it.
Okay.
We take those liquid venoms, we freeze them, and then we remove all the moisture, and that makes them shelf stable. And as long as they're kept out of sunlight, uh, super warm temperatures, that venom lasts for several decades
Wow.
on the shelf. So so that's kind of how it's sent out and how the customer receives it.
Very cool. And is there a specific species maybe have to more commonly extract from because there's a higher demand of anti-venom for it, or um, is it just like completely random?
Well, once those animals are immunized, um, they're getting what are called booster shots. So they're getting like updated doses to keep their antibodies being made against those species. So it really depends on the schedule of the immunizing that the pharmaceutical companies are doing. So it varies. Sometimes they need more black mamba venom, sometimes they need more saw scale viper venom. It just depends.
Right.
Yeah, it just depends on what that particular company is doing at that time.
And I guess the the snake that's most commonly, or I guess what the yeah, no, I don't know if my question even makes sense. Like probably how often the snake is envenomating people in that area would probably be more likely to have venom from or want venom from that snake.
Well, that's partially true. There's two types of antivenom that exists. There's one that's called a monovalent, which treats against one species. So, um, for example, antivenoms that are monovalents would be like king cobra, um, uh, monocle cobra, things like that. But what's used in the field to treat, because oftentimes people don't know what they were bitten by.
Right.
And so there's a type of antivenom that's the most popular that's called a polyvalent, and that's done by region. So all of the venomous snakes that are in a region, they produce an antivenom for that, and it's only one drug, and it treats all of those different snake bites. So, for example, in Africa, there's two. There's uh, what's called Pan African antivenom, which covers all of the species and genera that are there. And then there's MENA, Middle East and North Africa, that covers all the species there. So if a person is working in a field, they're barefoot or in sandals, and they step on a snake and are bitten, and the snake slithers away, which is typically what happens, they don't know what got them. So the one drug is a cure-all for anything venomous in the area.
Awesome. That's actually one of the questions I had for you was can you use one anti-venom to treat multiple different snake bites? So okay, that's very cool. Is there any species that requires venom from its like from it specifically itself to be an anti-venom to create an anti-venom, or do the poly uh sorry, what's the word you used?
Polyvalent.
Yeah, do the polyvalent venoms does that work for every species?
It'll work for every species that's considered of concern. So and there's also these other factors like we call it cross efficacy. So there's a lot of situations where a specific snake's venom may not be in the mixture for the polyvalent, but it can still treat it um, and treat it fairly well. So there are situations like that, but there's when you break down the toxicity of snakes, there are some snakes that evolved to have more toxic venom geographically than others. And so, in those situations, we have to use locality specific snakes to help make the antivenoms. Um, but the majority of snakes that are for Africa and the Middle East and whatnot, locality is not of concern.
Cool. Very, very, very cool. Um, that's awesome. Okay. So we've kind of already broken down what you guys do at MToxins Labs, and we've spoken about it a little bit, but maybe like a quick brief explanation. Other than extracting venom, what else do you guys do at MToxins?
So, a big part of when we expanded, we needed more production space. And one thing I always wanted was to open the type of zoo that I would want to go to as a kid, as a reptile lover. And so what we did, my business partner and I, we turned the other half of our facility into an educational center. So what people can do is they can come in, they can watch us extract venom and be taught about the different types of venoms and things, but also do fun things like pet tortoises and see our bald eagle and our owls and all the other venomous snakes we put on display. And we do a lot of outreach for school groups and Cub Scout and Boy Scout and Girl Scout troops and things like that to just get people engaged in science and hopefully conservation, because whether it's venomous or not, so many of these animals need to be protected, and need to be respected. And so that's a big mission that we have.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then did you have to get like specific cages to be able to display the venomous species in the serpentarium?
We got all of our cages from Zilla is a Wisconsin-based company, and they provided all of our caging, all of our safe, secure caging for our serpentarium, and and then it's we take in a lot of rescue animals. Our tortoises are almost all rescues and et cetera, et cetera. So we just have um, rescue snakes, all sorts of things that we use as part of our educational program. So it works out great for us because we're extracting the venom behind the glass, but we need to be doing that anyway. So we're getting our work done and people are getting educated and entertained while it's happening.
Same time. How often are you extracting venom? Is that like a daily thing?
It is a daily thing. So we extract 7 days a week at our lab. And When it's open to the public, we do it on the hour. Um, but On the days that we're not open to the public, we're doing several other species and all sorts of different stuff, feedings and things of that nature.
Cool. And then are the snakes that you have that you kind of just have in the back for extracting? Are they also the same ones that are on display?
No, well, to a point, we tried to put out a good selection of rare reptiles that we put out there, some of which are very understudied from a venom perspective. And so it depends. Usually, the snakes that are on display are typically retired. So they're no longer being used for venom extraction. We just have more of the same genus and species in the back that we're extracting to hit our quotas.
Right. And do you have to set them sort of sterile, or do you set them up in more of a natural way? I don't know if it would be easier to work with them with less things in the way, or if that even makes sense.
Well, as far as in the laboratory, every snake is kept on paper towel.
Right.
Um, and We use rack systems specifically. Venomous snakes are very secretive, and well, all snakes are very secretive, but
Yeah.
venomous ones sometimes more so. Um, and the stress of venom extraction can really take its toll on these animals. So we find the rack systems to be the most ethical way to house them.
But that doesn't go for the ones in the serpentarium, right? That would
Nope, the
be.
ones in the serpentarium are in bioactive exhibits.
Oh, very cool. Are there any other uses besides creating anti-venom and research for extracting the venom?
Well, there's several drugs that have been derived from venom. We do a couple of new experimental drugs that are coming out, but we're not unfortunately allowed to talk about them. Um, but there's such a litany of early breast cancer detection drugs and high blood pressure, low blood pressure medications, diabetes medications, um, that are derived from venom. Even some blood tests that are done, coagulation, coagulopathy tests, things of that nature, that are practical uses of snake venom.
That's very interesting. I I was always wondering if there was if solutions to some medical problems were in venom, and they're just in species that haven't really been touched before. But
Well,
um,
the thing that's interesting is as the scientific analytical equipment gets better, scientists are reinvestigating these venoms um, all over again, because as the equipment becomes more uh, sensitive, able to detect more properties, all these venoms are constantly being looked at over and over again, because there's so much opportunity to identify different um, properties that can help mankind. So it's a never ending thing. It's not like, okay, we looked at the eastern diamondback rattlesnake venom and we know everything we need to know about it. Now we can move on to another type of snake. It's every couple of years scientists are wanting to go back and look at these again, and they're finding more and more and more interesting things every time they look into it.
right. And they're not classified in groups based on their venom, right? So like um, different cobras could potentially have different venom, or are
Absolutely.
okay, yeah,
Absolutely. So some cobras, for example, are more neurotoxic. Um, so uh, uh, attacking the brain functions. Um, Others are more cytotoxic, which means it's going to digest. It has more digestive enzymes. It's going to rot the flesh. There's no snake venom is just really one thing and one thing only. What drips from those fangs is a very complex mixture that has so many different properties. So what we do is we try to teach in our facility. If you're looking at the identification information about a snake that's on display, we list as many of the proteins as we can, or effects as we can, the type of venom, but it's never typically just one. You know, like a black mamba, for example. Um, we list that it can cause tissue death. Typically, in a patient that's bitten by a mamba that's not treated, you don't see the tissue death because the neurotoxicity has shut down your diaphragm and you're dead, because you
before the
can't breathe
tissue.
anymore before the tissue can die. Yeah.
Wow,
So it's really very, and to anyone interested in that, there's a wonderful documentary that was made by a very good friend of mine, Ray Morgan, called The Venom Interviews. And if you search that on YouTube, there's a video called "It's Complicated," and it's about 4 minutes long, but it really explains the complexity of the venom uh, coming out of those fangs.
that's very cool. I definitely be watching that video, and I'll have the link to it in the show notes if anybody wants to go check that out. So on that, is it true that different people will also react differently to different venoms?
That is 100% true, and that's because uh, every person's body is different. We know, like, for example, in a certain snake bite, that we'll stick with black mambas as an example. We know that they're going to cause neurotoxic effects in every patient. But what you don't know is, does that patient have weak kidneys? Does that patient have uh, other types of health concerns where that venom could exacerbate that? So we see that treating snakebite quite a bit. Some people, go into shock. Other people just have their diaphragm shut down. It's very, very, it's varied. One of the top snakebite scientists, doctors in the world, once put it as, "You're a living science experiment," because you don't know how much venom you got from an envenomation typically, and you don't know how your body's going to react. So you treat with anti-venom, and you treat
Wait
the
and
other
see.
symptoms, yeah, as they come up.
Wow. Wow. Um, and then is it? I've heard it's the same thing for. And I don't know. Actually, that might be a good question. Do you work with any rear fang species, and is it the same thing for rear fang species?
We do work with a lot of rear fang species, and it's surprising how incredibly toxic so many of them are, but they have such an underdeveloped delivery system for their venom that uh, they can't really hurt you unless they're biting and chewing and chewing and chewing. Um, but I've seen bites from simple species, Boega, snakes in the genus Boega, that
Mhm.
have swelled people's arms to what looks like twice their size, and they're vomiting and they're diarrheal and they're incredibly sick, just from a very small dose from a snake that's treated as non toxic. Um, I know it's a fine line to walk because, so many of the rear fang species are considered not medically significant. But as we look at their venom, it is very significant. It just can't get into you, if that makes sense. Um, so, in the rear fang species, we really try to be cautious how we classify that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I've seen similar, like we hog noses recently got banned here. But before they were, I knew a lot of people who were keeping them and a lot of people who had been bit and had absolutely no reaction. But then the one time that somebody did get a serious bite, or I guess now you're saying it was not a serious bite, but that it was maybe basically chewing on his hand or something. But it was a pretty significant swelling as well. And so I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah, it's just like any toxin entering your body. Some people it can. We have a snake in the states, the copperhead. Some people lose their fingers from that snake, and other people take a Benadryl and never have to go to the hospital. It just there's so much variation in it, and you don't know how you're going to react. Personally, I think it's foolish that rear fang species be banned anywhere, just because um, you have to really be working to get injured by one. But they at the same time they do have some of them have very potent venom. So if you understand, it's a difficult thing. You don't want to classify these as dangerous animals, but they are kind of dangerous. There's a great book that I recommend to people that love rear fang snakes and want to know more about their venom, and it's by a man named Dan Keeler, and it's called "Venomous Bites from Non-Venomous Snakes." And it's one of the most comprehensive books about serious envenomation from rear fang snakes, and basically talks about that venom evolution quite a bit. It's a wonderful read. It's not too scientific. It's not written. It's written in a way that anybody can enjoy that book and learn something about rear fang snake venom.
That's very cool. Yeah, I'll be looking for that book as well then. Um, it's always interesting, even if you're not keeping the species, right? It's always interesting to learn, especially when you're in the hobby. Just the general information. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, awesome. Okay, so we spoke about snakes quite a bit, um, but I've seen on your website that you are also extracting from other species. So what other species besides snakes are you extracting from?
So we extract from tarantulas. We do true spiders, and we do scorpions. And our scorpion work is about 90% based just on anti-venom. Our tarantula work and true spider work is all done for research. So we also do centipedes as well, I should say. Um, and so there's a lot of people looking into those. And one thing that keepers have said to me when they visited is, why the heck would you look at tarantula venom? Tarantulas aren't deadly. The deadliness of a venom means nothing. Um, what what could lie within that venom could have a huge impact on mankind. So we look at it like all venom is important and all venom needs to be studied. So even though your Mexican red knee isn't going to bite you and kill you, there could be properties in that venom that could be the next wonder drug, that could help a disease for the human race.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sorry, I don't know if the ask this, but is there currently any papers that will be coming out on anything of the sort?
what we can say is that there are several papers coming out on centipede venom evolution and toxicity, as well as old world and new world tarantula species.
Very, very cool. Is it harder to extract venom from like smaller, like I don't say, I guess there's, you probably are extracting venom from probably pretty small snakes, but from like smaller animals like the tarantulas and the scorpions and all that?
It's different. It sets a different set of challenges. You have to have an incredible amount of patience because, excuse me, your typically we use a small electrical stimulation on the scorpions and the tarantulas to get them to release their venom. Um, so placement of the probes is very important, but these are also incredibly fragile animals that need a lot of respect because
Of
of that
course.
fact. So with tarantulas and centipedes, we actually anesthetize them with CO2. So we actually knock them out, and that way we can handle them very gently. They're not awake, they can't fight it and get injured. And we usually have about 30 to 40 seconds. So we knock the spider out, or spider or centipede. We quick get the venom sample. We put them back in their enclosure with a meal. They wake up and they're usually so angry they eat right away. So,
And all that happens in like 30 to 40 seconds.
yes,
Wow. Wow. And you're not doing the same thing with the snakes, right? They're
nope,
completely awake when you're okay.
completely awake.
Okay. That's very interesting. I Yeah. And also I guess another thing is, what about quantities? I assume you're getting probably a lot more from extracting snakes than you are when you're extracting from tarantulas or smaller animals.
Yes, yes. Oftentimes, to put it in perspective, we get a lot of phone calls and emails from people that want to extract scorpion venom because they believe it will make them rich. Um, on a side note, if you figure out how to get rich extracting scorpion venom, please send me an email and let me know how. Um, but typically, you only get one or two drops from a scorpion. And to put it in perspective, to make a gram of usable venom from a scorpion is typically 15,000 to 20,000 drops. So when you put it put it
And
that way, it's a lot of labor.
yeah, and you're getting like one, two drops from every scorpion, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. So why do people think it'll make you rich? Is scorpion venom very expensive?
It is very expensive, and there were several news articles that came out about certain scorpion venoms being the most expensive liquid in the world, and that's true.
Mhm.
But who's going to buy it from you? That's the question.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you could sit in your room with 10,000 scorpions and extract from them and have all this wonderful, expensive uh, eventual powder. Um, but who's going to buy it and who's going to pay that much? That's the question. And that's the hardest thing about the venom industry is, can just about anybody figure out how to extract a snake's venom? Yes, debatably safely, but what you do with that venom once it's done, and it needs to be purified and it needs to be freeze dried and all of those things, those are trade secrets that no one's going to share with anyone. um, because that's how we ensure the quality of our products. And that's what sets the Venom Labs apart. Um, we believe our process has us producing the highest quality venom there is. And it took over a decade to get that good at it. So, so yeah, anybody could quote unquote extract venom, but what you do with that venom and how you handle it and how long it's at room temperature and how you're measuring bacterial growth and all of those types of things are uh, make it a very complex industry to work in.
Right. And yeah, and like you said, you don't want to be sharing all your secrets and having just any private keeper be able to take over what you're doing.
We get at least an email a week of people that want to start venom labs, and they typically ask us to help them either in learning how to handle venomous snakes or to tell them how to process venom and how to produce a high quality venom. And we're not going to do that.
Right.
um, that's just foolish. It's
Dangerous as
it's
well.
it's dangerous as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of people that want to open venom labs, but really, if people want to study venom or if people want to work with venom, the smartest thing you can do is go into toxinology and toxicology. It's really or go into uh, just general venom science and get with a pharmaceutical company, get with some of these research institutions, the research that's happening at various colleges throughout North America. You'll have a way bigger impact. There's a reason there's only 9 venom labs, in the world.
In the
Um,
world.
yeah.
Wow.
Now there's several that call themselves venom labs but have no customer
Haven't.
base
Right.
or anything like that. But if you go by those of us that actually produce for anti-venom and regularly produce high volumes of venom, there's only 9 of us.
And are you like with the nine of you together? Are you guys producing enough venom to like supply the demand? I guess.
More than enough.
Oh wow. Okay.
More than enough. There's articles that come out that talk about the shortage of anti-venom, and the shortage is because countries can't afford it.
Hmm.
They have trouble getting it to their people in the ranges where people are bitten. That's where there's shortages. There's no shortage of getting venom to a pharmaceutical company to be able to continue and sustain and make their product.
Right.
So
No,
it's often misunderstood.
yeah, that's I've had heard the fact that there was a snake an anti venom shortage in the world and there was a problem in certain countries. So that's interesting that that's actually what's going on.
Yeah, there's usually more to the story than just the
What the media is
headline
showing you,
and what the media
absolutely,
is showing you. Yeah,
absolutely,
absolutely.
yeah. So, are there any other species other than tarantulas or scorpions, other than snakes, that you're working with?
Yeah, we do we do some amphibian work.
Awesome.
It's pretty rare and there's not a lot of demand. We get a lot of people trying to get us to sell them psychedelic toad venom so they can get high. Uh,
That's funny.
um, and But we do that, and we do lizards as well. We can't say we can talk about our beaded lizard and Gila monster work, but there's other lizards that we're working with that we've extracted from for other studies to kind of redefine those lizards' saliva. Is it venom or not? And
That is very cool.
Yeah, that's something that we're working on.
I
It's
think
been long-term projects.
I think I know what species you're hinting at.
Well,
uh,
there's a few varanids
okay,
that are
okay.
being looked at. Yeah.
That's very cool. What are for the beaded lizard and the Gila monster? Are you is it for anti venom purposes or also just for research?
Nope, it's just for research, and we don't sell a large amount of it. There are drugs that are derived from those venoms that are I spoke about earlier that are used, but no, it's just we have it on the shelf if a researcher needs it. Is
Okay,
one of those things.
very cool. Is it hard to extract from beaded lizards or from
It's
toads? Because it's not
uh,
orally, right?
Well, it is with
Oh, it
beaded
is.
lizards and Gilas. Yeah, what we do is we take a hollow tube and we have them bite on it, and as they're biting, they're expressing the venom out of their glands, and as that's expressing, instead of moving up the groove of the teeth in the bottom jaw, it's going down the tube and dripping into the collection vessel. So. So it's not too bad there. And with toads, we're typically expressing the gland into a vessel and then purifying it and going from there.
Very, very cool. Um, do all toads have venom? No,
Yes.
all toads have venom.
Hmm. Though they have a poison. Yes.
Oh yeah, I guess yes. It wouldn't be a venom; it'd be a poison, right? Yeah,
I'm really against that, by the way. I think it's perfectly acceptable to say poison for all of it because,
because a
you know,
venom is a poison.
yes, and they're all toxins. And one of the things, people get so hung up on that, the reptile community, and it's like English is the only language that differentiates between a venom and a poison. Every
Interesting.
other language, it's poison. So, I don't, I just kind of, I don't interact with people on social media about it, but I do laugh quite a bit when I see all of the
Somebody
memes
correcting.
and, oh,
Yeah,
yes.
I'm not gonna lie. I have been guilty of it myself. It's good to know. This is good to know. Uh,
I mean,
definitely.
the thing is it true? It's actually Dr. Fry that really pushed that difference and differentiating it. And he started that in the 90s.
Okay.
Um, and he's right, but at the same time, like I said, they're both toxins. They both don't belong in the body.
Yeah.
And they can both inflict, medically significant uh, things in us. So, you know, are the memes true? Yes, but should we, as a group of reptile enthusiasts, should we be so hung up on it? No, not at all.
Okay. No, that definitely makes sense. Awesome. What about the Masaga rattlesnake? Because that is the only venomous species we have up here in Canada. Do you ever work with them? And is
We
there?
we
Yeah, go ahead.
don't.
Okay.
We don't. Mostly because there's no demand to look at that venom right now.
Right.
Um, And in Wisconsin, where we're at, we have the eastern Massasauga as a native rattlesnake as well. But
Right.
the last thing we would want to do is take any out of the wild for studies that don't exist at the time. So that would be one of the rare situations where if there were scientists that wanted to study that venom, we would get permits from the state and then go in the field and actually extract in the field um, to get those samples just so we wouldn't have to take an animal out of the wild since here they're protected. I believe they are in Canada
They
too.
are protected here as well. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And but if someone was to say get bit, the anti venom already exists through like the
The polyvalent antivenom,
polyvalent
yes.
anti venom. Okay.
That's one of those situations that we say cross efficacy that I brought up earlier. So
Right.
the antivenom doesn't have Massasauga rattlesnake venom in it, but it doesn't need to. It can still be neutralized with the mixture that exists. Um, so yeah, that's how that would be treated.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Um, so I already know the answer to this, but I don't know if you want to talk about it or not. But I'm just gonna ask the question. We'll see where it goes.
Sure.
Um, have you ever been envenomated yourself?
Yes, I
Yes.
have. It's a
How was
horrible,
that?
horrible experience. Horrible
Yeah.
experience. And it's happened 3 times in my career.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
and that's out of hundreds of thousands of venom extractions
I was gonna
and
say yeah. Three times
handlings.
is like nothing. Yeah.
But they were all my fault. And any good venom extractor will tell you it's never the snake's fault.
Right.
It's something you did wrong. You failed. And that's true with any snake bite. With the exception of if you're hiking and you step on one or something like that. Um, it's typically human intervention that leads to a bite.
Agreed.
And my black mamba bite was the most recent in
Wow.
2020, and it was 100% my fault. The snake was not even trying to envenomate me. Um, I used 2 hands to extract from them, and it's because of their physiology and the way that they bite. I had my right hand index finger on top of the snake's nose while I'm holding the snake's head and neck with my left hand. And I had extracted its venom. Naturally, that's something we do. We don't express the venom glands, squeeze anything. We let them give what they're going to give. So they always still have venom in them. But what happened was instead of lifting my right hand first, I lifted my left hand first and twisted the snake's head and cut my index finger open with its fang.
Oh wow.
And so, even though I had just extracted from that snake, it still had venom all over its fangs. It still had venom in its glands, and it wasn't even trying to hurt me. It was completely human error.
Yeah, it wasn't a bite. It was more like a prick.
Exactly.
Okay. And
So there's
so
been uh, the worst was from a stiletto snake. That was my first bite in 2000. Oh, what year was it? I'm trying to remember. 2018,
okay.
and that was the worst bite. It's actually kind of a funny story. Two funny things happened during that snake bite. Um, Number
Okay.
one, we were extracting the venom from stiletto snakes as part of a study to prove that there's no anti-venom that can treat them. So, so I knew
So
that
there wasn't already an anti-venom.
there was no anti-venom at the time, and
Wow.
so the other funny thing was, uh, I help consult with snakebite, and when our protocol, we contact the state's poison control center and let them know that there's been an envenomation and all kinds of details. Um, my phone was ringing in my pocket in the hospital because they were trying to call me to consult on the bite that I had just had.
That you had.
So
They didn't know that it was you.
they didn't know it was me at first. So,
That's hilarious.
something, those were two situations that were funny. What wasn't funny was 2 days in the hospital, um,
Wow.
and it was
Were they freaking
mind-numbingly.
out?
Oh, it was excruciating pain. I was pretty confident that I was going to lose my finger where I was bitten. Um, Luckily, I walked away without any damage, um,
Wow.
but that was pure luck.
Yeah. No, that's crazy. And since then, have they found an anti-venom for it?
One manufacturer that we work with now has it listed as a species that can be treated with antivenom. Yes.
And how were you treated without the anti-venom at the time?
What they had to do was go into my carotid artery and put a line direct to my heart, and they were pumping a product called Dilaudid directly into my heart. Yeah. And it was excruciating. It was like having every bone in your body broken at once.
Wow. And you felt like this for the entire 2 days you were in the hospital?
Yes.
Wow. And once you left the hospital, how long before you were like back on your feet and ready to get back in the lab?
I went back into the lab the next day.
Wow. Wow. That is awesome.
Same thing with the black mamba envenomation. That's the only time I've had to receive antivenom, and I received the antivenom, and I was able to go home and be uh, back with my family just a few hours after receiving the antivenom.
Wow.
So it was right back to work again the next day with that too.
That is crazy. You know when sometimes people like have a car crash or something and then they can't drive for an extended period of time just because they don't want to relive that. You know, you were right back to work. That is incredible. Are you able to administer the anti venom to yourself, or do you have to have a doctor on call, or do you always have to go to the hospital?
Well, the anti venom that we help produce for Africa, for example, that can be administered by yourself. However, our hospital is only about 10 minutes down the road,
Okay.
so we grab the antidote and take it, on the trip with me to the hospital, and we actually had it administered there.
Okay. And is there any like, do you administer to the site of the bite, or
Nope, you
you get
just
it anywhere?
you typically reconstitute it and hang it in an IV bag,
Oh, okay.
and so it's just like a normal IV.
Okay.
Very, very interesting. Awesome. Okay, let me ask you this.
Hmm.
As somebody who's been working with venomous snakes for a long time, and somebody who there's like a protocol to working with them, and to being safe working with them. First of all, do you think they should be in private collections? And second of all, the way that they're currently viewed in the hobby, do you think we're viewing venomous keeping correctly, or do you think there's a better way to do it?
I think that I think that they're I think that everyone should have the right to have these animals as long as they are doing so safely, um, and in as prepared a manner as possible. Um, there are a lot of venomous keepers who do things right and take the necessary steps to know how to treat if they make a mistake, or have an accident, I should say, um, and things of that nature. Unfortunately, the thing that the general public likes is um, sensationalism and
Yeah.
things that are sensationalized. Um,
Right.
Working with these animals should be boring. It should be boring. Doesn't mean it can't be exciting, if you're, breeding species and things like that. But handling venomous snakes, working with venomous snakes should be a very calm, boring process, because if you're following what you need to do, just to be safe in general, it's not an entertainment. There's no entertainment value.
No, absolutely.
so so I think that the public, I think it's different. That I think venomous keepers get a bad rap because it's automatically assumed that they do so. They keep these animals because of ego, or for in the wrong reasons. But in reality, I think the the majority of venomous keepers that are doing breeding and doing really important work, and they're the ones that are the most quiet on social media. You don't hear from them.
Right.
What you see is the negative. And you know it's really difficult, because I didn't start out in a traditional way, like I explained at the beginning. um but that doesn't mean that you know people should be, I guess, running around yelling danger, 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 you know overreacting that they're going to be bitten and all of this kind of stuff. A good venomous keeper is a person who's worked with these animals for several decades and has never had a bite.
Yeah.
That's a good venomous keeper. um Anyone else, you screwed up somehow.
Yeah, like you said, it's always your fault, not the snakes.
Hmm.
Yeah, no.
Exactly. There was a really great, this is a story I don't tell very often, but it's there was a young man in a state close to us who was bitten by a monocle cobra, and he was a very good keeper. However, he did one thing that wasn't smart, which was he, that particular day, worked with that animal with nothing on his feet. So he didn't have shoes on or anything. He was barefoot.
Right.
Um, and he was keeping his animals, even though he was an exceptional keeper. The animals were so well cared for, everything like that. He was keeping them in a room that was too small, and he went to feed one of his snakes, and that snake came out of the cage charging in a feeding response and bit him on the foot. um, and you know there's someone who had their heart in the right place, was taking exceptional care of their animals, but underestimated that animal, and that's what happened. So it's it's difficult, and we have to kind of police ourselves. But we live in this age where close calls with a venomous snake um, on TikTok and Instagram and everything, that's what gets you views.
Gets you the
So
views. Yeah.
that's what people do. And one of these days, and I'm very adamant about this, one of these days, one of those YouTubers is going to get a serious envenomation, and it's going to be very, very bad. It's going to be very, very bad.
And not just for them, but for the hobby in general, because now
Hmm.
everybody's looking at us the wrong way and frowning on us, and this is why you shouldn't be keeping these animals. When in reality, again, it wasn't the snake's fault, but the keepers.
Exactly. Exactly.
No, I agree. That's very interesting.
So in short, yes, I believe people should be able to have these animals, and I believe they should be able to work with them. But the problem is it's up to the individual to be prepared and to make the right decisions. And as people, a lot of times we don't do the right thing. And we don't, attitudes can shift, your whole, philosophy of keeping these animals can change very quickly from, being a safe and steady worker around these animals to all of a sudden you start getting views and it starts giving you an ego and then you make mistakes. So it's difficult. It's difficult.
No, you're right. If only there was a way to stupid proof this hobby, that would be great.
Hmm.
Awesome.
Exactly.
I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I do have two more questions for you, if that's okay.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Awesome. So you just mentioned breeding. Do you do any of your own breeding in MToxins?
We do not. And the reason for that is baby snakes are a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what type of baby snake it is. They're just a lot of work. And so the way we look at it is a normal animal to ethically collect venom. It does vary by genera and species, but to be ethical, usually you want them to be around 3 years old. And one of the things that, and that's not like a rule that's out there or anything like that. It's just that's when the snake is mature enough to be able to withstand the stress of venom extraction. And um, it's just so much darn work, and we have so much to do already. So we partner with a great group in Florida called the Reptile Preservation Institute, that's ran by a couple, Cody and Pia Bartolini, and they
Right.
are exceptional venomous breeders. Well, they're exceptional at everything they do with crocodilians, etc. But they breed our mambas for us, our gaboons, our puff adders, a lot of the snakes that we need for the anti-venom production come from them. And they're considered private keepers, even though I think they're at a higher level than most zoos.
Right.
But so we work with places like that to do our breeding for us.
That's awesome. And then so you said, I lied, by the way. I just thought of like two more questions.
It's fine. It's fine.
So you said you start extracting at like around 3 years old. Is there also like a retirement age kind of, or like I've been extracting from this snake for too long?
I think I kind of look at it like if we know the age of the snake accurately, and we see a decrease in venom production or,
Right.
Any kind of lethargy or anything like that, we don't put them through it anymore. Because the thing you have to think about is, when you're a venom producer, your animals are your lifeblood. And if their care and health is not up to par, the venom isn't up to par. So it's one of those things where if I have a question about the quality of the venom an animal's producing, it's just not used anymore, because we don't want to risk ruining a batch of production or anything like that. And it's the same thing with a dairy farm. If you don't take care of your cattle, you're not going to get good milk.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
So same thing.
Is there, will a snake ever run out of venom?
So there's one venom extractor out of all of us that expresses the venom glands, and that will drain down and get about every last drop out of there.
Okay.
But it'll take the snake longer to replenish that, and venom takes a lot of resources from the animal to fill up again, let's say, is one way to put it.
Yeah, it's a kind of restock.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why we do natural bites. So like, for example, if I have an Indian cobra give a sample, that same snake could in theory be extracted from the next day and get another amount of venom. the majority of us do it so the snakes never run out.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense.
And there's, there's a belief that, and I don't necessarily share this belief, but there's a belief that the venom extractor that does express those glands is doing damage to the animal. I don't think that there's proof of that scientifically, but it's one of those things where if the snake, it's just the way we conduct, the rest of us conduct business. If the snake doesn't want to give us everything it has, we don't force it to.
Yeah, it's not stressful on the snake that way.
Exactly.
No, that makes sense. Awesome. Okay, and I want to end it on busting a myth, if possible.
Okay. Okay.
So one of the most common things you hear about venomous snakes and venomous snakes bite is that as soon as you get bit, the person should suck out the venom, spit it out, and then cut off the blood circulation to that area. How untrue is this?
It is so incredibly untrue.
I thought so. Okay,
So
what would you recommend?
well, using a venom siphon device, the minute that snake is bitten you and it's entered your bloodstream, it's already moving.
Right.
Our bloodstreams aren't slow. Our circulation is for the most part quite quick. So it really does nothing to get any of it out of there. One of the worst things you can do if you're bitten by a viper is to put on a tourniquet, because or a pressure immobilization bandage. Basically, you're keeping that venom, which is primarily, most vipers have a lot of cytotoxicity, so they're going to start to digest the tissue and everything. Now you're holding it in one part of the body, and you're probably going to lose a good majority of that limb if you do that. However, if you're bitten by something like a mamba or a cobra, a lot of them, it's the correct protocol to use a pressure immobilization bandage to prevent it from spreading. And a lot of times what will happen in remote areas is they'll do that. They'll set a makeshift tourniquet. And when they get to the hospital, the majority of that packet of venom, let's say, is stored in that limb. The minute that tourniquet is taken off, a lot of times patients will, boom, just like crash, because now it's circulating through everywhere. So it's like building up and building up and building up and building up, and then finally it's just boom, it's released all over.
Yeah.
But that buys you time. So siphon devices are basically useless, and the worst thing you can do if you were bitten by a rattlesnake or anything, any type of viper, is to keep that venom in the limb where it is. That's a horrible, horrible thing.
It's better to let it spread.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. And then so basically your advice is find the nearest hospital as quick as possible.
Exactly. And don't worry about taking the snake with you to show the doctor what bit you. Just
Right.
go.
Yeah, because
Just
they
go.
have. Right. No, that makes sense. Now we know they have the polyvalent.
Yes,
So
correct.
yeah. No,
Yep.
that absolutely makes sense. Awesome. Well, thank you for busting that myth for me. Hopefully,
Absolutely.
we can slowly get it out of circulation and people stop believing it.
That'd be great.
Yes, perfect. Nathaniel, thank you very, very much for coming on and for doing this with me. I learned so much today. I hope everybody listening does too. Um, can you tell everybody where they can find you or where they can keep up with MToxins?
Sure. So we have our Facebook, which is just facebook.com/MToxins Venom Lab. And you can learn about, if you are interested in visiting, or you want to just see our different animals or ask us a question, that's a great place to do it. Also, we do have an Instagram at MToxins Venom Lab. And we try to post on there fairly frequently, but we've been slacking lately. Um, but that's another place you can reach out to us and get information or help on anything. We're very driven to answer people's questions, so we welcome people to message us.
Awesome. And yeah, and I'll have the links to all of that in the show notes as well. Go check them out, give them a follow, support what they're doing. Nathaniel, once again, thank you very, very much for coming on.
Oh,
And
absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
No problem at all. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to do this one more time very soon.
All right.
Awesome. And for everybody else, thank you very much for listening. I'm Daffy's Reptiles on all social media platforms, Daffy's Roundtable for the podcast, and we will see you all on the next one.